Good afternoon and welcome. So this is the confluence of probably three different streams of people, and we welcome you all here. We have folks who've spent the day here at the On Center in the first day of the Syracuse COE Annual Symposium. So how about the folks who have been at the On Center at the Syracuse COE Symposium? Let's see who's been here today. And then we have folks who have been at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry at a GI Summit. So there are folks from the GI Summit. And then we have individuals who are coming from the Syracuse community and citizens in the community. So we welcome you all to this special event. I'm going to invite everyone to know that there's a half a day of the GI Summit tomorrow. And then there's a full day of the Syracuse COE Symposium, and we welcome everyone to participate in the activities tomorrow. It's my pleasure now to introduce Sherry Abbott. She's the Vice President for Sustainability Initiatives at Syracuse University and University Professor. She'll introduce our afternoon speaker. Sherry?
So I always worry that when we use acronyms like GI Summit that people are going to wonder if they are not familiar with the term, they might think this is a military group. It's my real pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker this afternoon, Bob Perciasepe, who's the Deputy Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Bob was confirmed by the Senate for his post on Christmas Eve in 2009. I suppose that's a better present than a lump of coal. But I suspect he wonders every once in a while about that. For example, in addition to his normal duties of his job, he's also served as acting administrator from February until July of this year when Gina McCarthy was finally confirmed as administrator. Bob's one of the nation's leading environmental and public policy figures, and he's widely respected by both the environmental and the business community, which is a rare quality. His extensive experience, and I've promised him I won't tell you how long, but it's about beyond 3 decades, so, but it's extensive, includes service both inside and outside of government. He served as the top EPA official in the Clinton administration for water and also for air quality. Before his post at the EPA, this tour of duty, he was the Chief Operating Officer at the National Audubon Society, one of the world's leading environmental organizations. And he's also had top positions in the state of Maryland as the Secretary of Environment and also at the city level in Baltimore. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from, as we say, a little college to the south of us, Cornell University, and a master's degree in Planning and Public Administration from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. Among his achievements, he counts having fallen in love in Syracuse, and he and his wife have 2 adult daughters. Bob's only trouble seems to be his name, which often is bungled. In fact, if you Google Perciasepe, the second pop-up is Perciasepe pronunciation. His nickname in government was Perch, having served with Perch in many deputies' meetings, of which always were serious, usually contentious, and sometimes deadly dull stuff. I can say that one of his special gifts, he comes to a meeting with an additional sense and a dose of the art of the possible, but always with great humor, and that has always been appreciated. So it's a pleasure welcoming Bob back to Syracuse to talk to us about cities and sustainability.
Okay. What's next? Sherry, thank you for that very nice introduction. And it is true, I sort of fell in love in Syracuse, but I also fell in love with Syracuse when I was here doing that. But believe it or not, that was in the 70s. Syracuse is easier to fall in love with today than it was in the 70s. I just want to say that. Ed, thank you for helping with the whole event that we've had today. Do I have I'm hearing feedback. Are you guys hearing feedback? All right. So as long as somebody's working, I see somebody moving to my left. But I also want to mention a few folks that are here with me. Judith Inc., our regional administrator from New York. This is her territory. And Nancy Stoner, although I'm not, there she is in the back, our acting assistant administrator for water. And Mark Lichtenstein is here as well. Mark, thank you for helping today with the green infrastructure, and obviously you'll do some more tomorrow and bring that to a precise conclusion so that EPA knows what to do. It is great to be in Syracuse. I try to find any way I can to come, but even if this conference was held anywhere else in the United States, I would try to come, because this is a really important issue for EPA, sustainability of our city systems. And they are a unique resource for the country, and they have unique environmental problems. And it is important that EPA particularly focus on how do we continue to improve the ability to make cities more sustainable. And, all right, we're going to give it a go here. I get to hold it. Can you guys hear me? All right. So in conclusion, you see? That hum was getting to me, and I'm hard of hearing, so I can only imagine what it was like. But you know, one of the things you get to do at EPA sometimes is you go to different places to speak, and it's usually to a crowd of people who are there for a very specific thing, like the new design parameters for biological nutrient removal, or how to do best available control technology under the Clean Air Act for visibility in Texas. You know, you go to those kinds of meetings. What's nice about this meeting, and the one we had up on the Hill on green infrastructure, is that it brings together a diverse group of people to talk about a subject that all of the expertise and backgrounds that you bring to this all intersect with. And I think that that's what's really pretty exciting. That's what this symposium is really bringing to bear, the diverse set of participants from academia, from industry, from community associations, from NGOs, from state and local government. Bringing that kind of brain power and experience together is really important when we're looking at urban reinvention and urban resilience. You know, one of the things that I did early in my career was work for a city. And I spent 11 years working in the city of Baltimore's planning department. And I dedicated part of my life to looking at urban resilience and how do you move a city from where they seem to have found themselves after World War II to where many of them are starting to go to today. And while this is not universally true across the country, what I believe we're seeing now in the United States is a great resurgence in sustainable communities and sustainable living and the association people have with their community. It is really a remarkable change from when I first started working in urban planning back in the 70s. It doesn't mean that, okay, we're done, we can move on. There are huge issues that I think a group like this, and if I look at the subjects you've been talking about, you clearly are touching on. But we are at a moment where there's a great ability to seize upon that momentum that already exists. And we need to have everybody seated, everybody needs to be at the table, or a whole bunch of tables, and to really try to keep working together and be willing to work together to find those solutions. And we can't really have a conversation about the urban situation, the urban environment. There's that word, environment. The urban story in the United States without talking about public health. And the challenges that we have with public health in an urban setting. And often what comes to mind right away is the environmental part of that. There's the nutrition, there's the housing, all these things are vitally important. There's the schools, there's the crime, all that is vitally important. But there is a foundation upon which that is worked, and that is, what's it like when you walk outside your house? What's it like when you turn on the water? What's it like when you take a walk? How do you get to and from work? Are you agitated as hell when you get to work because you've been in traffic? Or are you calm because you read that last 2 chapters of your novel on mass transit? Not the one you wrote, the one you were reading. Hard to write on a bus, I just wanted you to know that. So the availability and access to clean air, clean water, safe land, transportation options, these things are all foundational to sustainable communities and quality of life in urban areas. And I want to talk a little bit, obviously, about the water part here today, and the idea that infrastructure is really a key component of a sustainable community. And we all take for granted that when we take a shower or want to wash our face or make a pot of coffee in the morning, that we can just take it and do it. But if we don't invest both our intellectual and our financial capacity in making sure that that is sustained, we will decay over time in our ability to maintain that kind of infrastructure. And if we continue to do it the way we've been doing it in the past, it may be beyond our ability to completely afford it. We have to start looking at how we can build an infrastructure that is more sustainable. And then when we look at climate change on top of that, and how that can change the thermal situations in cities, or how there could be more intense storms rather than fewer intense storms, more rainfall or less rainfall, depending on where you are on the continent or in the world. In the Northeast, we expect to get more rainfall and perhaps delivered more rapidly in short bursts of 4 or 5 inches at a time of rain. We get 4 or 5 inches at a time snow all the time up here in Syracuse. So we can expect more floods, we can expect more storms, and we need to recognize what a strain that's going to put on the infrastructure that we currently have. And I think the good news in this regard is that we're witnessing a positive paradigm shift in the way we look at water. We understand, I think, pretty clearly that these water resources are finite and that they require some kind of stewardship, and they require us to find opportunities to make them more sustainable and to use them in a more sustainable, use water in a more sustainable way, and look toward conservation. And by the way, I wonder when we can lose the word wastewater. I just throw that out there. Wastewater. Really? The other thing about water infrastructure is that if you want a sustainable community, you have to have economic sustainability. Those of you who look at sustainability, you recognize it's really the merger of 3 big things. Sort of the social quality of life arena, which includes health, nutrition, things of that nature, education, the environmental part of it. Can you walk outside? Can you drink the water? Can you go swimming? Can you eat the fish in the lake where you catch? Those of you who live near here understand that in terms of Lake Onondaga. And the third leg of that would be the economic leg. Can you be gainfully employed? Can you have the resources through the economy to be able to have a quality of life? So all these things work together for sustainability, and environment is an important component of that. And the question you have to ask yourself is, can we have a good economy and a quality of life without a quality environment? And I think any objective observer will come to the conclusion fairly quickly that these things have to work together, that you need to strive for all of these to work together. And I think we've seen movement in this direction in cities in the United States. We've seen an improvement in all of these fronts. And water is one of those areas where we've seen improvements, and water is one of those areas where we have more to do. The Clean Water Act in the modern era, there was several passed in the 60s, was passed in 1972. And it called for the elimination of water pollution by 1985. Oh, missed that. You know, I have to break it up every once in a while, but this is serious. And that, you know, that's a case where the legislative eyes were bigger than the legislative stomach. You know, we wanted it, we tasted it, we could see it, we didn't want the rivers burning anymore, as they say, but when we really got into it, it's sort of like the fog of war. When we really got into it, we realized how difficult this was going to be. And we've made great progress in the last 40 years. But my goodness, we have so much more to do to maintain what we've, not only to maintain what we've achieved, but also move to the next level. And so that's why Administrator McCarthy at EPA and many others have identified water as a high priority that we really need to focus on. I know we're focusing on climate change, but I'll get to how they're related in a moment. We need to reinvigorate that national dialogue, that national discussion, that national energy behind achieving and maintaining sustainable clean water in the country. And I think at EPA we realize we're only one of many partners that are involved with making this happen. You've got local governments, you've got universities and research, you've got state governments who are very involved, you've got the private sector who's making investments in water quality improvements and looking at new technology. So it isn't just an EPA thing, this is a national thing. And the only way we're going to get there is if we all work together on it. And we have to find safe place, comfortable places for us to work together on it. And the word sustainability, while derided by a very few, is really a powerful, powerful concept to help us think about how all these different realms of our society, from local government, from neighborhoods to NGOs, universities, federal government, state government, all can work together to find new ways to make progress. And one of those areas is a conference we've been having. Many of you here, we raised your hands earlier. I won't ask you to do it again. But just to see if you do the same way, it might be fun. But the concept of green infrastructure. And really, in a nutshell, I define green infrastructure as trying to recreate, albeit with a little bit of artificial manipulation of the landscape, the natural hydrology of an urban area. And the first, most minimal benefit you can get from that is a more resilient city from flood mitigation perspectives. Instead of having the water run off in what's called by the hydrologists a flashy event, there's some attenuation, and it moves more slowly. And if it's done correctly, some of it will actually infiltrate into the groundwater, which we've given up on in most urban areas, recharging groundwater. And if it does recharge groundwater, you're going to generally be removing pollutants over time before that groundwater actually recharges a stream or a lake somewhere. So you've got huge advantages, and if you do this, you also create a different environment in many neighborhoods. You create more green space. You create different traffic patterns. You have something you have on the roof of this building. Anybody been up on the roof to look at this building? The roof of this building? It's got vegetation growing up there, as did the building we were in today up at the Gateway, the new Gateway Center at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry. So this idea of green infrastructure is kind of an interesting one, But what it really is all about is how do you recreate that natural hydrology, and in so doing, you actually create some of these other benefits of green and a more perhaps aesthetically pleasing urban environment. And you know, anybody here who's in meteorology and may have studied microclimates, like of a park that has no trees in the middle of the summer, call that a microclimate. Anybody want to sit in a park in the middle of the summer that doesn't have any trees? No, I don't. Microclimates change the climate at the neighborhood level, and more vegetation is going to change the climate at the neighborhood level. So this revitalization component is a piece of a larger thinking about the environments in cities. So earlier today, myself and the county executive from Onondaga County and the School of Environmental Science and Forestry and Syracuse University, my colleagues at EPA, we all got together to announce EPA is doubling down on our ability to try to work with everybody and on green infrastructure. And we issued a strategy statement. And it has 5 key components that I want to quickly rattle off here without a lot of exposition, because I know people want to eat. Improved coordination between federal partners. Now, I told you that EPA can't do this by ourselves. I think, for instance, maybe the Department of Transportation might have a role here, or perhaps HUD, who are funding lots of activities in cities, or the Department of Commerce with small business loans, or maybe even the Department of Agriculture and their Rural Development Administration. All of these federal agencies have joined with EPA in an urban water partnership. And 3 of these key agencies, HUD and DOT, have joined with EPA in a Sustainable Communities Partnership in an MOU where we're actually starting for the first time to coordinate our grant giving. So you get more points for a Tiger grant under the Department of Transportation if you are also doing some brownfields work and perhaps even some green infrastructure work. So you can see how this can start to work together for the entrepreneurial mayor and city council who will say, jeepers, if I start to coordinate this stuff at the local level, I might be able to even get more consideration for some of these grants and some of this financial assistance to get me going. And so this is what we want to create there. We also don't want the Clean Water Act itself to be in the way, because we see green infrastructure is a way to meet a number of important objectives under the Clean Water Act. So we want to make sure the Clean Water Act is working in the right direction. And that's why our Assistant Administrator for Water and our Assistant Administrator for Enforcement and Compliance have signed a memo to all the regional offices saying, please coordinate these activities. And if a city wants to do an integrated plan, let's sit down and do that integrated plan together. Sharing research and information. That was one of the key things we were doing today up at the Green Infrastructure Conference. We had people from all over the country who are actually here talking about what they're learning as they're trying to move in this direction. We need to coordinate better on project funding and financing, I already mentioned, and also capacity building, whether most cities in the country get some funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development for planning and community development activities. How do we coordinate that with what EPA does under brownfields and the area-wide planning grants that we are able to provide under the brownfields program? What if we started doing these things together? You can see what we're talking about here. So we're committed as an agency to be a catalyst at the federal level to try to pull this stuff together in tighter ways. And what came up today, which I think is really important, is that many of these agencies provide funding to states, cities, and other entities. And so it's important for us to make sure that if the money goes to the state of New York, here, speaking locally, or if it goes to the city, that the commitment for that coordination follows with the money. So I want to emphasize and underline how this strategy really underscores our agency's commitment to supporting communities in green infrastructure. And we can see that this support can really help. Here in Onondaga County in Syracuse, they were one of the original 10 communities we identified as leaders in green infrastructure, and we identified them as a green infrastructure leader, and we've been working with them over the last couple of years. We've also been providing technical assistance to another 17 or so cities. So we've been providing some funding, we've been doing some technical assistance, and we're starting to see measurable change in the kind of dialogue we have with the group of cities and communities around the country who are working on green infrastructure. The dialogue has moved from, doesn't this look like a good idea, to the really practical stuff of how do I coordinate between my permitting and my consent orders to remove overflowing sewers? How do I start to factor in operations and maintenance? Is it going to be any different than it would be for gray infrastructure? How do we get the public involved? Shouldn't this be stewardship instead of operations and maintenance? These are next tier conversations that are really important. You know, green infrastructure is not only good for all the reasons I mentioned, it also can be cheaper than some of the traditional approaches. And we have done a number of studies at EPA, case studies that demonstrate that taking a green infrastructure approach can actually reduce the present worth, those engineers in the audience, of your overall stormwater and combined sewer overflow programs. They're also good for public health because they're going to reduce pollution, they're going to improve local microclimates, they're going to change not only stormwater pollution, but in cities that have sewer overflows, reduce those overflows. So it's locally important. It's also good for the economy. You're going to be creating jobs to begin with by doing the infrastructure work, and we know that every dollar we spend on infrastructure in the water realm, whether it's green or gray, is going to generate jobs. And we know that it's also going to save the ratepayers money to go the green infrastructure route or mix and match. And there's no place in the country that will solve all its water problems by green infrastructure. As enthusiastic as I am about this, it must be matched up with a prodigious amount of gray infrastructure, which in most cities already exists, so it's been built in there already. And when it comes to climate change, one of the things we know is that the healthier our cities are, and the more that people are able to live in cities and look at transportation options, work closer to where they live, the less greenhouse gases are emitted, period. So if you're wondering how green infrastructure and local resiliency and improving the environment and the livability of cities has anything to do with climate change, it does. Because the more livable our cities are, the less people will flee them. And we are, again, I want to be clear, we're not the only game in town in making cities livable, but it's an important foundation upon which to build. And green infrastructure investments can really help change that paradigm and change the livability of cities and maintain that sustainability. You know, whether it's green roofs, increased permeable ground coverings, alternative building designs, rain harvesting. Who here knows what happens to the rain that falls on the Carrier Dome? I love this one. The county executive gave me a hard time about this today. The water is collected and it's used in the toilets to flush. I guess the better way to say it, it's used for flushing purposes at the Carrier Dome up the hill. Our case studies that I mentioned are everywhere from New York to Seattle to Lenexa, Kansas to West Union, Iowa. And across the board, we're seeing the ability and the opportunity to save money. This is really a win for communities when we try to incorporate this with our other work. And this is something really important to EPA. There's a number of other things we're doing to help here, and I'll quickly list them. We've provided technical assistance to 17 to 20 communities enabling us in each one of our EPA regional offices to have a community that we can do community-to-community sharing of ideas and information. There's 10 EPA regional offices. Our Office of Research and Development is developing usable tools. One of the messages I have to bring back from the conference that we've had yesterday and today is that the products from our Office of Research and Development needs to be more accessible and usable. Well, they're now working on a stormwater calculator that can be used by any engineer, I'm pretty certain, and that will take into account not just runoff, but also the different effectiveness of 9 different suites of green infrastructure techniques. It will look at it's looking at the water quality benefits of not only the hydrologic change, but the water quality benefits. And we have a climate module that would be built into it this winter that will look at the what-ifs of changing patterns of meteorology. So we have a challenge going on with campuses. We call it Campus Rainworks Challenge. We did one last year. Campuses all over the country participated in looking at how they could do green infrastructure on their campus, and they got a small cash award and lots of recognition from EPA. And we're working very hard in our regulatory programs to incorporate green infrastructure options and other sustainability measures in our work. You know, here I am up here from EPA talking to you about how we're working really hard to improve life in communities. And I have a hard time these days, given all that has been said over the last several years, to not remind any audience I've been talking to about what EPA has already done in the last 40 years to improve the life in every community in the United States. Air pollution across the United States is down aggregately almost 70% from what it was in 1970, with more cars, with more economic activity. In fact, GDP went up 200% during that time period. And that has improved the quality of life of every city in the United States. Every city is cleaner today from an air pollution perspective than it was 40 years ago. Anybody ever remember? I can remember because I'm old. Diesel buses in your neighborhood. Well, there's still some out there, but they're becoming a thing of the past. They're either hybrids or they're now using high-tech diesel engines that EPA enabled by putting in requirements for low-sulfur, ultra-low-sulfur diesel fuel. Those engines can perform almost as well as a gasoline engine in terms of the air pollution profile. You know, lead is a pretty ubiquitous element in most of our urban areas, and it's a legacy from lead in gasoline and lead in paint. EPA banned lead in paint, and we took lead out of gasoline almost over 20 years ago, and that is starting to pay dividends in every city. The blood lead levels in children in America is going down every year as we move through that process. It's certainly not low enough in some communities. It's still not equally apparent. We have some communities where there's still too high levels of lead, but that has changed the profile of American cities. EPA did that. Nobody's smoking here. 20 years ago, people would be smoking. 25 years, people would be smoking. I used to go to class at Syracuse University and people would smoke. I'm not telling you how long ago that was. I have pictures of people at EPA working in 1973 with cigarettes in their mouth. EPA in the 1990s did a risk assessment on secondhand smoke, which showed that secondhand smoke is a Class 1 or Class A carcinogen. That swept through the country like wildfire, and every local government and many states banned cigarette smoking in public places. Think of going to your favorite restaurant 25 years ago with half the people in the restaurant smoking. So when anybody tells you that EPA has never done anything to improve the life of Americans, think about that. We didn't regulate cigarettes, but we did the science to prove that it needed to be put out of public spaces. I apologize to any cigarette smoker in the audience who might be offended by this. I used to smoke myself. I'm happy I don't anymore. And so it's hard for me to talk about what EPA is doing to try to work to improve communities without mentioning how much we've already done to change the environment in virtually every city in America. So we have more to do. The work that you guys are all talking about in this symposium, the discussions we've had in the green infrastructure meetings earlier today, and that will go on until tomorrow, is vitally important to continue making progress. And the kind of progress we can make is profound. And the changes we can make in sustainable and resilient urban systems in the United States is still an unfinished story. There's work to be done in other venues that are not EPA's purview, like education and crime and jobs. Although EPA's work directly affects the ability to attract employment and attract new jobs to urban areas, whether it's on a brownfield site or because there's good infrastructure there. So we're in the game. We're in the game to stay in the game, and there's nothing more important to us than continue to make progress on the infrastructure side, on the water side, and continue to improve the environment of our cities in the United States, because in order for them to be sustainable, they have to have that one part of the circle, the environment, that is conducive to quality of life. And that's foundational to an economy and to the health of the citizens of the city. So I'm very excited about the work we've already done. I'm really excited about the water infrastructure and green infrastructure work we have yet to do, the brownfields work that we're already we're moving ahead on in more aggressive ways, and our continued work on reducing and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, which will, over the long haul, help us from having climate change be any worse. So I really, really appreciate you inviting me here tonight to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about some of the work you've been talking about over the course of the day as we have a reception and we have dinner. So thank you.
Open the floor for a couple of questions. Any questions for Bob?
Hi, Bob. Brian Levitt with Hitachi Consulting. Thank you so much for the wonderful speech. Since a lot of folks here are at the state level and the local level, what can state and local governments and folks even at the municipal level do to better kind of coordinate their efforts with federal work at EPA?
Yeah. You know, we're in an era now where all of us have been constrained. You know, state budgets, you know, after 2008 declined precipitously. That's had an effect down to the local level. EPA and the other federal agencies are now subject, you know, for the last 2 years have been getting further reduced. You know, I won't even get into the details of what's going on with EPA's budget. That's assuming we have one, but we do have one until February, I think. So, but my point in this is that all of us that are in public service, we have to recognize that we no longer have the luxury to reinvent the wheel each time. We have to keep learning from each other, and then we have to coordinate more closely than perhaps we ever have before in our federalist style of government we have here in the United States between the local, state, and the federal government. We can't do all this stuff ourselves. We can't expect you to do it all yourself. So collaboration, which is the #1 thing in our strategy, and I think we should change it not just between the federal agencies, but also with the states and local government. But that's the whole purpose of the strategy. So I think what we need to do is double down on our working together, so that we're as efficient as possible to move forward. So I think what I would want from local and state governments is a willingness to put the shoulder into it in a collaborative way, and what I'm willing to try to deliver from the perch that I sit on, that's my nickname incidentally, is you know, a more coordinated federal approach. So you know, that's very generic when I'm answering here, but I think the way the resources are now arrayed for public work requires us to coordinate more than we ever have. And we can't, I think, get anywhere if we don't do that.
Chucky Holstein with Focus Greater Syracuse, which is a citizens engagement group. And we first started talking about sustainability maybe 6, 7 years ago, and everybody's eyes glassed over. Now we're talking about resilient cities. Is that the new name for sustainability? And what do we really mean by resilience so we can tell the citizens when they hear this what we're talking about?
Words, you gotta love words. But how many try this one? A sustainable city would be resilient. I don't know if a resilient city might not be sustainable. These are words. I mean, the reason resiliency has come in is because we do expect, and we've seen, an increase in severe weather events and severe economic events. And the more dynamic a city might be, the more diverse its economy is, the more prepared it is for severe weather events, the more resilient it could be. In other words, it's not that you're not going to get hit. It's not going to be that you won't be damaged, but your recovery period would be quicker and the amount of damage would be less. One of the things we learned, for instance, when Hurricane Sandy hit the Mid-Atlantic or the New York City metropolitan area was the widespread power outage stopped the movement of fuel. We couldn't move fuel into the ports. The refineries were turned off, and that whole metropolitan area is actually now very relies a lot more on finished product to be shipped into New York and therefore unloaded at the port. Well, the pumps and all the other activity at the port had no electricity, so it couldn't work. And gas station, there were big lines for cars to get gasoline. It wasn't that there wasn't gasoline out there, it's just that it was in tanks under the ground where there was no electricity, so you couldn't pump it out. So I think we've learned, and people are actively looking at how can we deal with that? Where do we have backup power? How do we deal with backup power? How do we recover more quickly? I'm just giving you an example of the interplay there. But you know, sustainability is a very high-level umbrella concept. Well, there's lots of research that's been done into this. I mentioned the 3 areas that people often look at when they see that these things sometimes they're called pillars. National Academy of Sciences calls them the 3 pillars of the social, economic, and environmental. But the truth of the matter is we're on a continuum. You know, to me, it's a continuum, and you want to go in a more sustainable direction on that continuum. You can't just sort of skip over all the stuff in the middle and end up there. And we may not even know what that is, but we know that at some point in our society, we're going to have to reuse materials. We're going to not waste. We have to not waste as much materials. We have to be more efficient at the natural resources, including energy that we use. And so if we can move down that continuum to be more sustainable and to have an urban systems and community level systems that have more quality of life so that they are economically sustainable, that is, I think, what we're all looking for. I can't sit here and tell you I know what a sustainable city is. I can probably more easily tell you what it isn't. But I do know it's moving in that direction. And if you look at the energy profile, just looking at energy of many of the large American cities, I think you'll find that the per capita energy use in cities is less than average, particularly cities that have transportation choices, whether it be walking or whether it be buses or transit, or or growing use of bicycles. I saw a lot more bike trails in Syracuse than I saw 2 years ago. So I think what we're all moving toward is how do you keep going down that continuum to more sustainability. You know, if we ever want to reach the goal that Congress established for the clean water of the United States, that we could eliminate, that's the word they used, eliminate water pollution, we're going to have to find a way to change our mentality about wastewater. So,
Can I answer that quick? Okay.
easier said than done.
All right, I guess I've got the mic. So this is Lisa Warnicki. Let me just ask you a quick question, and that is, can you talk a little bit about how you're going to operationalize your new strategy in terms of green infrastructure with local governments, in terms of two things. One is synchronizing outreach among all of the federal agencies that have a similar interest, and secondly, how you'll be catalyzing internal local government management capacity, technical capacity, GIS capacity, so they institutionalize it within, the local governments can institutionalize it within their governments for sustained benefits.
All right, to the first question, how can we operationalize some of this? Well, luckily we're building on a foundation of things that are already underway, so we don't have to completely invent this now out of whole cloth, because we've been working on this for a couple of years and we've got some traction now. So we have the three agencies I mentioned, HUD, DOT, and EPA, in a Sustainable Communities Partnership, where we are now looking at each other's grants. We actually have EPA people sitting on the grant selection committee for DOT. I'm trying to get the same thing to happen over at EPA. I think it happens a little bit informally now, but we're moving in a very different direction than we had in the past. And I think what our strategy is really trying to put out there is that we're going to push harder even. Maybe we need to get HUD, maybe we get HHS and the Department of Commerce and USDA as part of that partnership. But they are those agencies are part of the Urban Waters Initiative that we have, where we're coordinating amongst the agencies. So I think it's incumbent on us to try to push that harder, so what's delivered and the face that a local government or a state government sees when it comes to these issues is a little more coordinated. So the transaction cost is reduced for local government to take advantage of that. Again, one of those things that's easier said than done, but we have some examples where it's starting to happen. One of the things that's absolutely true always is that success catalyzes more success. And what we need to do, and I see Nancy sitting next to you, we've done a look at, I don't know if this was a planted question. I'm suspicious. What we can do is we can do these case studies for places where we're now working and get that information out, because what we're finding in the case studies, the things that we're saying are possible are actually happening. They may not be happening to the depth and extent we want them, but they're actually happening. And this is maybe an unusual event. We thought this would happen, and guess what it is. So I think the more we do that and get that out there, the more we can catalyze and the more we can build that united front, so it makes it easier for local governments and state governments to transact on this with the federal government. This is not without transaction costs. This doesn't happen by some miracle elixir. There's going to have to be work to figure this out, just as there's been work to try to figure out the other stuff we've done. But that's a good question, and I don't know where all this will lead us, but our intent is to make it go faster.
Join me in thanking Bob Perciasepe.